If the New Orleans Saints want an offensive mastermind as their next head coach, they've got some options, and one of them they're already very familiar with. We got all of that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at three offensive mastermind young candidates that the New Orleans Saints could look for their open head coaching position. If you want to hear more about offensive coordinator and defensive coordinators for the Detroit Lions, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, as well as Cliff Kingsbury, that's in yesterday's episode. Day before that, we broke down why Darren Rizzi may already be exactly what the New Orleans Saints need. So if you're a Rizzi fan, make sure you go back to Tuesday's episode for that. Today, we're going to take a look at Liam Coen, the offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and why his development of Baker Mayfield could be a perfect fit for Derek Carr. We'll also take a look at Bobby Slowik, the offensive mastermind, part of that Shanahan system with the Houston Texans, why he could be a good fit as not only a good offensive coordinator, but head coach as well. And we're going to lead all of it off with a familiar face for the New Orleans Saints, Joe Brady of the Buffalo Bills, the offensive coordinator there. He's done a great job so far. Is he ready for a head coaching position? Where it all started for him. We got that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The New Orleans Saints are on a bye week, but if you want to hear all of the breakdowns of the upcoming games this weekend, you could check out Crossover Thursday across the Locked On Podcast Network with all of our NFL shows. Crossover Thursday presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL so you can get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. We're going to start off today's episode with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills to discuss Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady. Of course, somebody that started his NFL career, at least here in New Orleans. Could he come back as the New Orleans Saints head coach? I started off the questions with Joe very simply. Is it as feasible as we think, Joe Brady coming back to the New Orleans Saints? Here's what Joe had to say.
It certainly feels like the New Orleans Saints have an appetite for people that they're familiar with to take on prominent roles. And so I totally understand connecting the dots. Obviously, Joe Brady gives a lot of credit to Sean Payton for where he's at in his career. And so you could definitely connect those dots and find some logic. He's offensive minded. He's young. He's had head coaching interviews in the NFL already, right? To Atlanta last year. He's interviewed for the Houston job, and he was on that fast track, man. I know Saints fans remember 2019 LSU, greatest football team I've ever seen in the college ranks, best offense I've ever seen. And so I can understand how he's attractive. And you just kind of wonder about the career that he's had to this point, from hot shot name, right? He was the name in coaching to, well, you go to Carolina, and that just wasn't a great spot for you. You're the fall guy. Unfairly, in my opinion, and it took him some time, right, to get back into a play caller role. And so I'm sure he'll be pretty choosy with his next destination. I wonder if it's this offseason thing, but I think Joe Brady's kind of right back on that track to being one of those hot names in the head coaching world.
Yeah, I wonder if the Carolina experience makes New Orleans a spot where he kind of has a little bit of pause, because they're not ready to go right away, right? Like, he could end up being a fall guy in terms of showing up in New Orleans, being a familiar face, and then 2 years down the road, after having led a rebuild or captained a rebuild, have his product sold off to somebody else. So I'm curious, is New Orleans, beyond sort of the connection, is what they have to offer right now a fit for Joe Brady, knowing that it's probably going to be Derek Carr and the weapons that they have right now, at least for another year?
Yeah, I think, Ross, that's where I get a little hung up. And I think, candidly, where New Orleans is going to have some challenges with getting their next head coach is it's not a super attractive place, just based on some of the talent that you mentioned that you're stepping into having to work with. But also, we know how it goes with the Saints and the cap, and it's just a very tight situation. And there's going to be a lot of player movement that's going to be necessary once again to become cap compliant. And so you're still waiting for New Orleans to like actually embrace a rebuild. And I don't know how attractive this spot's going to be for Joe Brady and a lot of other candidates as well. And so someone will take the job. It's 1 of 32, but if you're a hotshot name, this might not be the destination that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at Joe Brady, I mean, we have to imagine not only are the other coaching jobs that open up possibilities for him, but we have to imagine that going back to Buffalo for at least another year could be a possibility for him. Is that kind of far-fetched to say, or is that a true possibility as well, to where not only are you competing with the open jobs, you're competing with him staying in the job that he already has?
Yeah, not a bad spot to be. Josh Allen's offensive coordinator and play caller. That'll get you places, right? We saw Brian Daboll take that opportunity and become the head coach of the Giants. And so I do think the fallback option, if you will, is continuing as the Bills offensive coordinator probably puts him in a position to be even more picky about his next spot. And, obviously he's got a good thing going. The Bills have been a lot better football team since he's been the offensive coordinator. Josh Allen's playing the best football of his career under Joe Brady. The maturity that Josh Allen has is at a high level. And I give a lot of that credit to Joe Brady and structurally how he's designed the offense and what he's baked in for Josh Allen to execute. So I definitely understand why we're having this conversation, but it might be a little bit challenging to pry Joe Brady away from Buffalo based on just the trajectory that he's on. And you see it feels like these coaches are just being more choosy lately. It's some of the hot names. If it's not the right spot, I think people are understanding how important fit is. And if the coaches aren't feeling that out to the way that they feel comfortable, they're happy to stay where they're at.
Yeah, it feels like Joe Brady could be another, not necessarily in terms of reputation or anything like that, but kind of take a similar trajectory to what Ben Johnson did over in Detroit. Let me go feel it out. No, not the right fit. Let me go feel it out again. No, not the right fit. And then be perfectly comfortable continuing to come back until that right spot opens up. In addition to your coverage over at Locked On Bills, you also cover the entire NFL over at Locked On NFL Scouting. You've mentioned before, and we both kind of spoken very candidly about this, that the Saints not necessarily the greatest sell right now. You have to imagine that Joe Brady could be a guy that is a little bit more kind of timid with jumping into that particular situation and kind of just going, I'll just stay where I am and see what's available next year, or look at some of those other opportunities.
Yeah, I think what does make New Orleans attractive, though, is they have been a loyal organization. I think that's a piece of the equation that gives you some appeal. And think about where the Giants are at right now. How many coaches in a row is it going to be, like 2 years, 3 years out of there, right? And I think they kind of got away from what we used to say about the Giants and that they're a loyal organization. And so that'll help New Orleans, plus the fact that they are 1 of 32 opportunities. But are they going to lure a Joe Brady, or is this more of a, what gamble can we take on somebody that maybe not quite ready? Maybe there's a retread that makes sense for them. It's going to be fascinating to see where it lands. And obviously there's a whole lot of bigger questions about New Orleans when it comes to the roster, the salary cap, and really what the vision and the path forward is to getting out of this cycle that they've been in for the last several years.
All right, a big thank you to Joe Marino from over at Locked On Bills. Next up, we're going to be joined by Big Sarge from over at Locked On Texans to discuss Bobby Slowik, from need to get offensive coordinator, the target of all targets when he was available, to potential target of all targets when it comes to head coach. Let's break down why Bobby Slowik could be a good fit in New Orleans as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by Built Rewards. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that gives you points for paying your rent. Every month, pay your rent, and then watch the Built points roll in. You can then use those points to jet off on a dream vacation, put your points towards a flight or a hotel stay with over 500 airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also put your points towards booking fitness classes as well, redeem them towards future rent payments. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app, and then your rent game just gets a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the highest value of point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. So to earn points for paying your rent today, you can head over to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl. That's joinbilt.com/lockedon. Make sure you use our URL so that they know that we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl to start earning points for your rent payments today. Today's episode of Locked On Saints also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can continue to tackle the NFL season with America's #1 sportsbook over at FanDuel.com. And right now, new customers can put $5 down and get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's it. So all you got to do is win a $5 bet, $150 in bonus bets coming your way. You download the FanDuel Sportsbook app where they'll give you access to things like live betting, live play-by-play, live stats as well, all in the same place where you place your bets. Doesn't get more convenient than FanDuel.com. That's where you want to go to join today. You can get in on some of the NFL action this weekend, some of the NBA action this week as well. You can even look ahead to the future. Right now, the New Orleans Saints 6.5 wins. You think they're going to come in at over or under? You can get in on that and much more over at FanDuel.com today, where you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, family. Houston Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Slowik was once the hot ticket when it came to offensive coordinators. He could very soon next be the next hot ticket when it comes to head coach as well. So here to help me discuss Bobby Slowik as the New Orleans Saints' next potential candidate at head coach is Big Sarge from over at Locked On Texans. And I started our conversation off asking a simple question. What is it about Bobby Slowik that makes him so desired in this conversation?
What makes Bobby so good is because, one, he learned under the Shanahan tree. He learned under Kyle Shanahan, and he's seen what an efficient offense should look like. He also has a year under his belt, with C.J. Stroud and with Tank Dell and with Nico Collins, and seeing what an offense can do when it's run to perfection. Like this season, they've had some issues. They've had a lot of the offensive line issues has caused the offense not to look as well, and some of the sequencing issues with Bobby Slowik has caused the offense not to look well. But if you just look at the Monday night game, they looked a whole lot better. And of course, they were going against the Dallas Cowboys, but that's what it's supposed to look like when CJ can get the time, when CJ can get the protection. And I'm talking about where he normally used to have issues in 5 and 7 step drops earlier. He did a 7-step drop, 26-yard completion to Tank Dell. And so that's what Bobby looks for when he puts the game plan together. Now, I know that Bobby's name is not as hot as it was last season, but he's still the same Bobby Slowik. And so will he, with a little bit more of maybe a better offensive line, and that's no real knock at the Houston Texans offensive line, but they do have interior offensive line issues. But if you can get an offensive line that has some good interior protection, you can see what he can do, and he can put together. He can draw up some really, really good plays. Now, sometimes I don't like the wide receiver screens, and sometimes I don't like the double reverses or the jet sweeps with Tank Dell.
Sure.
But with what New Orleans has, I mean, he could be, he could do a lot for that offense.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. Look, I was high on Bobby Slowik as a potential offensive coordinator candidate a couple years ago, thinking that he would be the type of guy that could potentially elevate to head coach. I love that he's already kind of getting that conversation. Let me ask you this. You get to talk to him constantly, weekly. What about his personality as a head coach? Like, is he one of those guys that would be that quote unquote kind of leader of men, or would he need to kind of build the staff around him to help do that?
The good thing about Bobby Slowik is he grew up in a family of football, and he's seen football from both sides. He's seen it as a coach from the, coach on the NFL side, but you remember he also, he did some analytical work. And so he sees it from both sides. Bobby Slowik is a very, very intelligent person. He has a very, very high IQ. And the one thing that does make him good, but also could be to his detriment sometimes, is the fact that he has seen the NFL from both sides. I'm talking about from the offense.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So he started out as a defense. So he's drawing up these plays to look at it from a defensive perspective as well. I haven't heard anything in the locker room, and I get a chance to talk to these players a lot, but I haven't heard a bad word about Bobby. And I talk to these players off the record as well, and they have nothing but the utmost respect for Bobby. Now, Ross, we know that it's one way when you're a positions coach, when you're a coordinator, but then you become the head coach. I mean, I'll use D'Amico Ryans as an example.
Yeah.
You know, former player, defensive coordinator, becomes the head coach. Now all of a sudden, hey man, some of the players don't like him because he controls the playing time. He controls everything. So right now, Bobby only controls the offense. So he could come in, and as he's controlling the offense, the defensive players could not like him. And so I think that once he takes that step up to the next level of being a head coach, he may get some pushback. But as far as right now, I haven't heard a bad word about Bobby Slowik, the person.
What about an extra year of Derek Carr? We've seen the Shanahan system work with a bunch of different types of quarterbacks, but more than likely you're going to see Derek Carr in 2025, and then the head coach will probably get to choose their quarterback in 2026. Is that something that you could see Slowik working with?
So I've said this on numerous occasions on the Locked On Texans podcast, available wherever you get your podcast from. I said this on numerous occasions on the Locked On Texans podcast that I think that this year, Bobby, as a second-year offensive coordinator who hasn't, called over 50 games in his career, he may have had too much talent with CJ, Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz. Like there may have been too many mouths to feed on the offensive side of the ball, and that may have been too much for him. With that being said, I this is just Big Sarge's opinion only. When you look at Derek Carr and what he's accomplished, I still think that CJ's a better quarterback and he has a higher ceiling, and he has better attributes than Derek Carr. And so if Slowik was to come to New Orleans, it goes back to Kyle Shanahan again, because if you look at the quarterbacks with Jimmy G, you look at the quarterbacks with Brock Purdy, his system works well when he has game managers. He hasn't never had, those type of quarterbacks with that type of skill set like a CJ Stroud. So Bobby may be able to come in and say, okay, I can work with Derek Carr. And not saying he can't work with CJ, but it's just two different types of players. And, Derek Carr falls into that Brock Purdy and that Jimmy Garoppolo type of tier. And so now you get that in there, and now you can call some of those plays because you'll still have, Alvin Kamara who can do some of the same things that Christian McCaffrey can do. You still have that dangerous wide receiver core that you have. So I think that may fit him a whole lot better than next year, because even with what the Texans have coming back, and they're not going to do anything but add more talent on the offensive side of the ball. And if Bobby isn't prepared for that, Bobby may not be around for long.
Big thank you to Big Sarge from over at Locked On Texans, one half of the Locked On Texans podcast, breaking down Bobby Slowik for us. Coming up next, what if the New Orleans Saints were to steal someone from across their very same division? Well, Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator Liam Coen has the track record of somebody the New Orleans Saints must consider. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp Therapy Online is awesome. And particularly in a month like this, as the holidays approach, sometimes some lurking feelings can come up and things like that in therapy can be a very good way to kind of work through those feelings. And look, it's the month of gratitude, right? Sometimes we love to make sure that we're showing gratitude to others, but how about gratitude for ourselves, right? Like you got you where you are right now. Like maybe you deserve your own little pat on the back. And that's something that I learned through therapy, actually, something I struggled with quite a bit. So if you're thinking about therapy, I highly recommend that you give BetterHelp a try. It's been massive for me. Really got started during the pandemic, if I'm being honest, and haven't given it up. And I've been doing it all through BetterHelp, which is designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule because it's entirely online. So look, it's time to let the gratitude flow, and you can do that with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/locked-on to get started today and get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. If there is one candidate outside of Darren Rizzi that I think the New Orleans Saints should be paying very close attention to, it's Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator Liam Coen, who I personally think is ready to be a head coach, not only because of his offensive scheme, but because of his experience around the NFL and college and his ability to develop talent, which might be the thing that's most appealing about him. So the biggest remaining question around Liam Coen is he ready to be a head coach? That's what James Jarko of Locked On Bucs is here to help us answer today.
I certainly think he is going to be interested in being a head coach. You know, he bounced around quite a bit, you know, went from the Rams to Kentucky, back to the Rams, back to Kentucky, and he took this particular job. This was the one that he wanted because of Baker Mayfield and his relationship there. I do think he's going to be interested in being a head coach. I just think he wants to be the head coach of the Buccaneers if they end up moving on from Todd Bowles. Now, on the flip side, you know, if the Bucs make a run here, which they're poised to do, they have one of the easiest schedules the rest of the season. That might save Todd Bowles' job. And much like Dave Canales last year, there's only 32 of these jobs out there. And with what he's done, with the offense, springboarding him into kind of the coaching stratosphere, well, you have to strongly consider that as a possibility. You look at Byron Leftwich a few years ago. It seemed like he was going to be the coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He backs out. Right. The Bucs have a terrible offense, and Byron Leftwich is nowhere to be found now. So you have to take advantage of those opportunities. And if that opportunity in Tampa doesn't present itself, he's going to look for those chances.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, for folks that might not realize, a couple of years ago, there was this great storyline of Baker Mayfield arriving in Los Angeles like on a Tuesday and then playing and winning a Thursday night football game. Liam Coen was a big part of that, and a big part of where those two, I believe, ended up kind of firing up their relationship that brought Liam Coen to Tampa, or at least strengthened that connection. So looking at that and looking at the success that Baker Mayfield has had this season, which up until he lost both of his top wide receivers, this is a guy that was in early MVP conversation. What can you share with us about Liam Coen as a developer of talent from that offensive coordinator spot?
I mean, I think he's really done a phenomenal job. And while Baker had a good year last year, there's no doubt about it. Like, he had a career year for him. He's on pace to have almost, record-setting year for the Buccaneers this year, even without Mike and Chris for a chunk of the season. Now, he's right on the cusp of being on a pace to break Tom Brady's single-season touchdown record. So, he's really doing well. And then, you take a look at what Liam Coen has been able to do with Baker, but on top of that, implementing and involving Bucky Irving and leaning towards his strengths. And then, I mean, really, the shining example that I can give here is take a look at the 3 games since Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down. Yes, they are all losses, but you put up 26 points against the Falcons, 24 in Kansas City, pushing them to overtime, then 20 against San Francisco when your number 1 receiver is Cade Otton. And no disrespect to Cade Otton, but, you have Sterling Shepard, you have Ryan Miller, you have, Jalen McMillan has been in and out of the lineup. You have Trey Palmer. You do not have, any kind of marquee wide receiver. So Liam Coen has really been able to find the strengths within his offense, lean on those, stay with those, not that whole, square peg, round hole kind of situation. So he really adapts so well to what his team does the best, dealt with offensive line injuries and has adapted the blocking scheme, trying to help out backups there. So he's an incredibly intelligent guy that these players just gravitate towards.
Yeah, I think the gravitation of the players is really evident in terms of seeing him in Tampa, looking at him in Los Angeles, and even looking at him in Kentucky. I think having that sort of bounce back and forth between college and the pros is actually kind of helpful when it comes to that development standpoint, because in college, that's what you're trying to do. At least if you're a good coach, that's what you're trying to do. If you're not a good coach, you're just trying to win a chip. But, these guys are looking at developing talent. What about him as sort of, a leader? Like, is he a guy that people could rally around on both sides of the football as a personality?
100%. The players absolutely love him. I've been told by some of the players that they were ecstatic when he was announced as the hire, and you can see why. And there may be some downward trends in terms of statistics for individuals, but as a whole, you're talking about an offense that has basically been top 5 most of the season across the board. And the run game got off to a little bit of a slow start, but they've really picked it up. And it's because of the combination, obviously, of Rashid and Bucky. But these players love playing for Liam Coen. He's a fun dude. Doesn't take himself too seriously, but he's serious when he needs to be. And you can kind of, it's one of those situations where it's like, okay, he's cracking down. It's time to really focus in, and it's really time to listen, because when Liam gets serious, we know it's serious. He can have fun and make this a good environment to work in. But when he's serious, and it's time to really get down to work. So yeah, these players absolutely adore him. And he's going to be one heck of a head coach if and when he gets that opportunity.
Yeah, it's funny you describe him as being like this guy that doesn't take himself too seriously, that he's fun to be around, but can be serious when he needs to be. The Saints are finding success with exactly that kind of personality right now as their interim head coach and Darren Rizzi. So you can see a little bit of how that type of personality can translate to that head coaching spot, kind of 1-to-1 based upon what the Saints are looking at right now. Last question for you, because obviously there's the Liam Coen side of this, but there's also the New Orleans Saints side of this, right? And what do you have to offer as a job for any of these candidates? Saints are not looking like the most beautiful landing spot available going into this offseason. Salary cap issues, no long-term quarterback, all this other stuff. But 1 year with Derek Carr more than likely in 2025 based on his contract, and then being able to pick a quarterback after that. Is that something you feel like Liam Coen would be able to work with, considering his success with other veteran quarterbacks?
I don't see why not. And it may be a situation, depending on how the rest of the Saints season goes, that he might look to get his quarterback now, knowing that he still has a year with Derek. And he can start to, mold kind of the future of the New Orleans Saints while still being able to utilize the intelligence and the experience of Carr, and not completely blow it up and start from scratch. And it would almost be kind of a transition year, and being able to focus on getting his system implemented. And who knows, you could have Derek Carr having a resurgence the same way that Baker has. And he goes, okay, we can win with this dude. We can win this division. We can make some noise in this conference with Derek running my offense that has worked out so well.
All right, y'all. How about James Yarko coming over from enemy lines? Even had some nice things to say about the New Orleans Saints. Best believe I will never let him live that down. We appreciate you very much for being here today. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, I'm still trying to line up the interviews, so I'm just going to be transparent with you. We're either looking at Deion Sanders to lead off the show, or Bill Belichick to lead off the show. So 2 huge names in the conversation, but are they actually realistic for the New Orleans Saints? In any case, we'll be breaking that down for 2 of the hottest names in the upcoming coaching cycles of really the next few years to come, until they both eventually land their next gigs within the NFL landscape. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL. And of course, we thank you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. A big shout out to my homie Hunter. Had a great time. Appreciate you and everything that you've done. And we will see you here again on another episode of Locked On Saints. If you need anything else in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson NOLA. Hit me up. They're not a family zone about how you live, and let me know how you mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.